Again, thank you all for coming this evening. Can you hear me now? It needs to go up more. More. No. Yeah. Again, thank you all for coming this evening. We have a lot of exciting things, I think, that we're going to be sharing with you between Trevor and myself and some others to see where we are going with this church and where God seems to be leading us. It's been interesting over the last several months. I'd even say since back in October maybe, that we've been really being stretched as a leadership team about God's will and where that goes. And a few scriptures I just want to share with you on God's will. I mean, David brings it out here, I think, well, with desiring to want to do God's will, and in order to do those things that God wants you to do, we have to make sure we understand what God is and who He is in our own hearts. And when we get to Romans, it kind of confirms that a little bit more. Our ideal to find God's will is to make sure we step out of the world and look at what God has planned for us. Now, I don't know about all of you, but sometimes it is difficult to discern what God's will is and where it's going and what the purposes are and how to deal with all that. Well, when you look at God's will, you know that God will on earth as it is in heaven, as the verse says, right? What we need to do are the things that God would want us to do in order for us to be in heaven. So what we have is this promise here that if we stay out of what the world would expect us to do and do as what God would expect us to do, then there is nothing that God will not help us through. He provides the immeasurably more and gives us the things that we are able to do here. Ephesians talks about this quite a bit, and it talks about this immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. Now, we've been asking quite a bit about what is it that God is leading this church to. What we can get caught up in sometimes is our past. We all know we've been through quite a bit, but we also know that God has brought us through also quite a bit. God has brought us to this point with Trevor and the Littletons here, and what God is planning for us in the future. We are trying to understand where God's will is in leading us to, and we believe that God is leading us down a path so that this church can be successful, that we can do what God's will is, and when we do those things, this idea of immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine. Now, I know we all have some pretty good imaginations, right? What's the chuckling for? Is your imaginations up there? Yeah, I would say so. I can imagine quite a bit, but I do have to admit sometimes my faith maybe doesn't match my imagining. But we understand that God is still there and doing all the things that He needs to do to encourage us in a path that will allow us to be the disciples, the church, the ones that are going to win those to Christ, which is His overall will, as Timothy puts it, that all men will come to Him and be saved. So those are the goals that we are trying to aim for here. So with that being said, it's led us through much prayer and talking and discussion to the idea of this Project Next. So what is this? This is what we believe God is leading us to in this congregation in the next phase of our ministry. We're calling this Project Next because we have gone and been somewhere, but now what does God have next for us? We've got the basis here, we've got the people here, we've got the minister here that God's led to us in order for us to move on. So what is and what are the next steps that we are going to be looking for? If you look at the area around us, in order for us to get that numerical and spiritual growth, there's 60,000 people in the area around us. Now, that's just not Painesville. That includes all the outlying areas that are out there. Now, we know that there's some other churches out there that are doing the same things we are, but when you look at the amount of people that are out there that can be reached through the efforts that we believe God is leading us to and through, there's a lot of potential for ministry to get back where we were, to get back to a God-driven, guided church for the places and the things that we need to do. So what does this project next entail? Well, there's a couple of things here that we're going to be talking about today. One is a family life pastor, and we talked about that already. That's what our Christmas offering was driven towards. That's what was so successfully, we're going to have to delete that last part off the camera there. That didn't come out as well as I would have hoped. It came out much better than we'd hoped for. You know, sometimes you just really shouldn't highlight your mistakes. It's too embarrassing. Now I can feel myself turning red up here as I keep talking. So the first part is the family pastor. We're going to be talking more about this as we go on. But there is another part of this whole idea that we're looking towards that we have actually been lacking in for quite some time, and that's strengthening our financial and fiscal health here. We have a gap that we're going to be talking about here shortly, so you can see and understand what the second part of this is, so I'm not going to say too much about it now. Now I'm going to have Trevor come up here and talk about the family pastor and what does that mean, and what's all going to happen with that, so he's going to give you some insight on that. What we're going to do is, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. We'd love to answer any questions you have. If for some reason a question you ask may be answered farther on in the presentation here, we're going to ask you to try to remember that. I know that could be difficult, but whisper it to your neighbor so they can remember and bring it back. But feel free to ask questions, and if we're going to answer it later, we'll let you know that. So with that being said, I'm going to have Trevor come up and talk about this position that we're going to look to fulfill and what God is going to do with that here at Paynesville.
I'll trade you mics. Thank you. There was a successful mic transition.
Yeah, we'll see.
And there goes the paycheck. All right. We're recording this, by the way, so after tonight, I'm going to take some time and get it together, maybe edit a few scenes out or whatever, but we'll go. But no, I've had my fun. I want you to think beyond the idea of family life pastor. Before we touch on that, I'd really like for you for a moment to think through a few things. And that is, number one, what first brought you to this church many years ago when you would have started attending. As I've gotten to know many of you, it's almost sounded like the same story. There was something here for your family. There was something here for your kids. There was a youth group. There was kids ministry. There was something as people moved into this area that drew them to this church. I want you to kind of put a pin in that and think about that for a moment. But I want you to think of the Great Commission. Successful churches today are what we would call and define as missional churches, okay? What we are doing is we are embarking on a mission. This is more than a campaign. It's more than an idea. It's more than a philosophy of ministry. This is our call to biblical Christianity. This is our call to being what is a missional church. I want to ask a few questions that are a little challenging, but they need to be done. Who in this room is in their 20s? Okay, we got 1, 2, 3. All right. How about their 30s? I'm no longer there. I just left that club. Here we got a couple of them. So we got 3 in our 20s, 3 in our 20s. Okay, 4. There we go. All right, so that's what, 6 people? Okay. How many in our 40s, honey? We're good. We got this. Shanna looks like she's in her 20s, but she's in my decade now. Yeah, see? Yeah. I had to say that. It was part of our marriage agreement. It's all good. Anybody else in their 40s? Just us? Okay, we got one other one. Okay, so there's 3. So we got about 9 people, right? How many are 50s? Okay. 60s? 70s? 80s? I stop there. I don't even go above it. When the elders, when we were talking and deciding, is God calling our family up here, and do we have a divine appointment? Do we have a divine meeting, so to speak, in our partnership of ministry? One of the questions, and Max had asked this, he said, Trevor, what do you feel is the lifespan of our church? If we stay on the same course and if we stay on the same trajectory we're on now, what does the future of our church look like? And it was my belief that we had in the ballpark, if we do nothing, if we continue to move in the path that we're on, we might have 10 good years. 10 good years left as people grow older and life comes and goes and does what life does. And some of us go to meet Jesus. Some of us lose our energy and our steam or move on to another congregation, to another community, to another state, or whichever it is. How is the future of our church looking? That's hard. That's hard. Okay? But it would behoove us to not consider that as a ministry. We have to think that way. In that conversation, a few other things came up, and it says, what happens at the death of a church? Essentially, we have before us the opportunities to have a good outcome or a sad outcome. Per any church or any nonprofit organizational bylaws, if a church were to cease and no longer function, there are hard decisions that would need to be made by whatever trustee or eldership would be in place at that time. Those decisions would be, who do we give our building to and our assets? Do we allocate it for a mission? Do we liquidate and sell it and give that money and funding to a mission, to another church? How do we do that? Let's agree to never have that conversation. Okay? I'm down with that. But in order to do that, we have to be very proactive with our thinking. We have to be a missional church. Now, having met you and known you, you're that. You really embody a missional church. And when I say missional, I mean beyond missions. But the same thinking is that we want to reach people for Jesus. We want to passionately reach people for Jesus, and we want to lock onto that theme. In order to do that, we have to go after the next generation. We have to honor Scripture and to do that. I want to read a passage to you, and this is from Titus. And it's very interesting, and I think this church stands in a solid position to do just this. The passage is from Titus 2. It says, you must teach what is in accord with sound doctrine. Teach the older men to be temperate, worthy of respect, self-controlled, and sound in faith, in love, and in endurance. Likewise, teach the older women to be reverent in the way they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to much wine, but to teach what is good. They can train younger women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled and pure, to be busy at home, to be kind, to be subject to their husbands, and so that no one will malign the word of God. Similarly, encourage the young men to be self-controlled. In everything, set them an example by doing what is good. In your teaching, show integrity, seriousness, and soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you may not be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about us. The biblical idea of ministry and of church is that the church be multi-generational. Okay? I came from a church where one of our weaknesses was that we were not multi-generational. We were dominated by younger families, and I think that showed and demonstrated in a lack of maturity in some areas. I think here we are in a place where we are incredibly mature, but in so doing, we have the ability to think missional. How can we reach a generation who does not yet attend our church? Okay? Out of probably 80-ish people, what'd you have, Terry? How many people were here tonight? 80? Okay. So out of 80 people, we had how many of us below the age of 40? 6 below 40. Okay. A couple of us there. So 9 below 50. How many did we have above that? 71? okay? The difference in our heart is to not change what we do and what we respect as far as our heritage. It's just to add to it. It's to bridge from what we've built, from what you guys for many decades have built. How can we reach families for Christ? That's what we're asking. So there's a lot of strategies, and there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing that. What we feel that God has been calling us to do is to begin the process of growth here at a church where we feel God is leading us into a series of both numerical and spiritual growth. So how do we begin that work? How do we evangelize families who wake up on Sunday mornings in Paynesville and Lake County and do not attend church? They're in your neighborhood, they're in mine. I know several of them who are in my neighborhood and my neck of the woods, and so do you. I've been able to meet them, etc. How do we reach them for Christ and encourage them and say, listen, we've got to connect with you and bring you not only to church, but to a life-changing relationship with Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior? And how do we do that? We believe our efforts as a church can begin with basically working on a family program and making family the foundation of how we just do ministry and reach out and operate. We as a church are a family. There's a strong fellowship here. Let's just add to that. So we want to hire a family life pastor. Now, some questions we might have with that are just this. What is the difference between a family life pastor and a youth pastor? Well, a youth pastor will focus exclusively on only the youth group, being teenage students. So anybody probably 5th grade through senior in high school. This position will be a little bit more than that. I want you to think of it for a moment that this position would be like a coach, like a family coach. And their idea and their goal is they'll work out of all their job descriptions. They'll put more effort into the youth group. They'll have more energies dedicated there, but they also will be overseeing our kids' ministries and our young adult ministries. It's what we call cradle to college. So anything from birth to college age would be under the oversight. The difference is this person will be working with adults also. They will not just be a youth pastor and pigeonholed there. We don't want to just say, hey, you're going to be our guy. We're going to completely bury you into this one part of our church where you'll never see the light of day again. That's not effective and healthy ministry. What we want to do is we want to see a position that's designed in such a way who can say, hey, I want to build a team of people to oversee young adults after high school. I want to build a team of people to work with our youth ministry and equip that team to be successful. I want to build a team of people and align ministry from every age group beyond in accordance with what's already happening in the church so that church-wide we're on the same page, we're functioning with the same ministry, but we're reaching the same vision, the same families, etc. So they're going to operate over that. So they'll work with those students, but they'll also work with people to say, hey, we want to build effective ministries. So say, for instance, right now that like, I know Derica. You have a celebrity couple name now, right? Right? You can do this. Wave the hand, be royalty. It's all good. So you guys and Sarah help teach the high school age, right? Yeah. So let's say for a moment that this individual is coming and say, hey, we want a team of people to work with this age group and mobilize them, equip them, and just continue to build a stronger vision. Maybe that's his team. Maybe you guys say, no, we don't want to be on that team. We want to do this. Well, whatever that calling, but just the example of that and just build strong teams. Take the people who are already serving in kids ministry and say, hey, here's some guidance and direction. Here's some stuff that we see is working in 2020. I almost said 2019. That's working in 2020, and we want to build on this and build strong, healthy ministry that's effective today, that can retain families and parents and reach people and draw families in to the kids ministry that we have, because there's not many churches in Paynesville area who have just an outstanding killer kids ministry. This is ours for the taking. We can be doing this right now. One of the things that I've talked to the elders about, and it was challenging to talk about, but we have grown as a family to very much love this church and love the relationships we're building with everybody. However, if my family was attending here and I wasn't the senior pastor, my family would have some hard decisions to make, because what's there for a family, not necessarily even mine, but others, what's happening for families that age, and how if we go out and reach them through another community engagement, we can have other things we do, but if we bring them in, what are we bringing to? What's here for these families as far as ministries are concerned and related? So it was very much our heart to work on that. So that's the actual position of the pastor, family life pastor that we have. All right, so that's the stuff upcoming there. We have we planned this as an eldership, and we had gone through and discussed the need for it, and we approved to work through for that. We had a plan that we had in place as far as how to bring somebody on board. You all know my situation with my former church where we were at. They owe our family about $23,000 in back pay and salary and some of that stuff. That's been a real challenge for us and to go through that. So we had this meeting with our eldership, and then I had a letter that I sent to the eldership where we were at, just reminding them, hey, there's a lot of back pay salary that we need. And I had a call that day, and it was from the gentleman who took over for me. He was our associate there in Marion. And he said, hey, man, I don't know how to tell you this, but since you've been gone, the financial challenges have actually continued. We couldn't pay our phone bill. No, I'm just joking. He said, listen, they actually now owe me $15,000 also. So his next sentence, now this is not a related conversation, but his next sentence, he said, will you be a reference for me as I look elsewhere for a ministry? He said, I'm done. We've had enough. We can't keep doing this. So I said, it just so happens that we did this and we had this conversation. So I talked to him a little bit, and I'm like, hey, if you still would be on board with working with me, I could talk to the elders and just continue to pray this through and see what God would open up and align. A lot of it had to be a timing thing, and I get that. In Marion, we hired Joe to do this very thing in Marion. His role did change later because our needs as a congregation were a little bit different, and we asked him to take over discipleship, but we hired him originally to do this family life role because Joe is a very good coach, teacher, personality to kind of work with people one-on-one and to go through with that. So we as an eldership, we prayed about it, continued to work through it. Long story short, here we are. So he basically is the candidate that we're working with. Our fleece, so to speak, with this is the timing. If he's still available for this when we're done with what we have to share tonight and the plan we have to share, we'd like to bring him in to meet everybody and to preach and to share and to work with you guys a little bit and get to meet you, and then we'll make a decision from that point. But we've talked with Joe, just a moment. We've talked with Joe, and essentially our mentality was, and why I liked the idea of him coming here, was basically, I know this church, there's a certain type of personality we would need to hire somebody right out the gate who would come in and say, hey, I want to see all these ideas go and advocate for change and all this other stuff. Joe's personality would blend very well with what we have in place. I think he could work well with my personality, with us as a church, and that was some of the things we liked about him.
I just want to know where the church team is in all of this. I don't think that we can just, the elders can't just say, this is our one person. I don't think we can do that. First of all, your search team needs to be made up of Sunday school teachers, parents of kids, people on the Christian Ed team, and they need to ask for resumes and go out there and make sure you've got the right person. Just because you don't say it's the right person, how do we know that?
Right, and I respect that. A couple of things of note. Search team number one, whenever they would meet, a healthy search team should be asking the question, who do we know that might be a good fit? That's a discussion that would already be there. So if there's already someone that we've known, hey, this person's worked already with our senior pastor who knows the personalities, that has to be part of that criteria. Also, if there's no one that would meet that criteria, then we'd be asking another question. Who do we know that would know someone else? So is there another pastor, another professor from a Bible college, someone else who would know that? If you've exhausted those options, then you would say, hey, let's put this out to the Bible colleges and go. We did also have a meeting with the search team on this. We met one Sunday after church and we discussed this.
That search team was to get you. That search team
Okay.
was not for you.
Okay, but we did have that meeting.
But did they agree with you?
Did they vocalize it there? Right.
Have they interviewed him? Have they
Right.
seen his resume?
We're bringing him into the congregation there. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Since I was on the search team and an elder, the discussion came up. Should we involve the search team? Trevor suggested maybe we could involve the search team and hire him. They did a good job to get him here. So we brought that search team in and asked them after church, would you be willing to meet with this guy? We're going to send him the questionnaire that Trevor filled out. Would you want to look over it and meet with this guy and give your yay, nay, whatever? And the message we got from the search team was, we kind of trust Trevor. They didn't feel a need to
That's not what I'm hearing that came out of that meeting. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Let me speak to that, Linda, because I was on the search team and I was in the meeting that Mike's talking about. Search team is a recommending body. That's all we did, even with Trevor. We looked at resumes, we made recommendations, and we did this also for Mike Martin. Our job was to find a qualified person and recommend him to the elders. Well, if we've got a person that's already got the qualifications, search team adds no value.
How do you know there's not somebody better?
Well, you don't, but
Right.
this is a candidate that goes to the elders for them to review. They make the final call, not the search team. Search team never makes the final call. We just screen applicants, and that's what there's no need to screen somebody that you already know their background. So that was our feeling, and I think it was unanimous among all of us that were on the search team.
I don't think that's true.
Oh, well,
I was on the search team.
you weren't in this meeting.
And I know nothing about this candidate. We don't know anything about him, the only thing we knew that day when we met was that Trevor recommended him. But we thought that we would be meeting, I don't even know why they had us come there. But don't think that I know anything about this candidate. I don't know.
It doesn't
Only thing
matter
I
if
know
this
is what
person
you
has
know
the
is that
qualifications,
Trevor-
it goes to the elders. That's the way it works.
The what?
If the person has the qualifications and he's worked with the man, that's better than anything we could ever
You
hope
said
for.
no, it's true.
If he's
He was
worked with the man,
recommending it.
Yeah,
They're
but you
not.
said that the
We're
search
not saying the
team,
search team is recommended.
no.
but you also were saying that when we were in that meeting, we thought that we would be seeing something or going over something. Why were we even brought in here? Why did?
No, we
Let me speak to that a little bit. As elders, we were talking about this, and I want to make something clear. This position, we decided this position before we even had anybody in mind. Yes, Linda, that's a fact.
I didn't.
Oh, you're shaking your head like no, so I'm just trying to make sure we're good. So the idea here is we want the position and we want to try to work towards that goal, and in all things being equal, that process would have been done. You know, if the search team would have been put together and things would have been done that way. It just so happened that Joe came along, and it was more of a, well, let's talk with him, just see where he's at. And the idea was, well, you know, why don't we just see if the search team wants to talk with them, just to talk with them. Now, we already knew a few things. One, we knew that we were going to try to get the Christmas offering for the youth minister, the family minister, right? In the elders' minds, we needed to meet a certain criteria before we even started looking, whether you had some name on the table or whether you didn't. God bless that. We are now talking about the second part of this that we're looking for in order for that to happen. We're not necessarily looking for this person just because we're not recommending anything else with that. If we and when we decide to go forward, when God shows us through this process that we can go forward, the idea is that this would have been a recommendation for us, and he would have a chance to meet the congregation and come like we do any other candidate that's brought before the elders, and the elders take a look at and bring out there. So that's going to happen. Whether it makes any difference or not, in my mind, with 40 years of experience at Lubrizol and hiring many people, and experience hiring people here, in the hiring person's mind, you have an idea of the qualifications of the person you're looking for, right? You got a list of things that you want to meet. Sometimes you meet that criteria, and sometimes you don't. Now, a lot of times what you'll find, in at least the corporate area, you'll have somebody you have in mind that meets all the criteria, but still they want to put it out to see if anybody else is interested. So the problem you have is you start comparing qualifications to someone that you know has had experience in that area. And if it doesn't measure up, it doesn't measure up, or if it does, and you can look at it. I guess the problem would be is, as you know, the search team takes a lot of time. Takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of man hours to put the sheets together, to look through all the things that you need to do. And I guess the thing would be is, on a supposition that there might be somebody out there better, but there might not, what benefit would that do? So I guess in our minds, that's kind of a little bit where we're thinking. We could go through the process, but we may end up just where we're at, only farther down the road, and have given some people in the congregation a lot of work to do, but probably little benefit from it. We are not trying to circumvent the congregation. We're not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. We're not trying to eliminate anybody or not give anybody an opportunity. The one thing, as in my mind at the beginning of this, is trying to follow God's will, is when things fall into place that you don't expect, for whatever reason it is, it's hard to set aside some of the obvious things that we think God is doing, because we seem to be following His will to an end. Joe is one of those things. Whether he gets hired here or not still is for God to decide, because there's other things that have to happen to get along with that. I don't know if that helps out anything or makes it more unclear.
And the fact is, not all the people that served on the search team had an input on this. I didn't accept it. He only told me.
I can't hear you, Dick.
He said that not everybody on the search team had input to what this was.
I heard later what it was. I did not sit down and make it quiet.
Yeah, you weren't in town at the time, were you? I think you were out of town at the time. Go ahead, Beth.
I've not been involved in the search teams in previous searches for any of our staff members. I was involved with the one when we were searching for Trevor. Excuse me. During that process, I had learned a lot about what had been done in past searches, that kind of thing. To kind of build on what Rich said, actually, is we would look at any resumes from anyone who might have shown qualifications, and we had a rubric to go by to check and see who might be a candidate and who might not be. And as we went through the process, believe me, there were a lot of them that many of us, scored as like definitely not for this church. But whenever we found a candidate or suggested a candidate that might match, everybody else went by the wayside. That person was referred to the elders for review. I could have misunderstood some of what took place in the meeting. I was there for the meeting, but that at the time it was suggested this might be a direction maybe we might want to go in. What were our thoughts on that? And there was some discussion. I don't recall personally that we were ever going to meet again to go through a process with any candidates here, that we were going to reinstate the search team for another staff member at that time. That's not my understanding of the meeting. I could be wrong. So with that, I do know that it was suggested that Trevor had a lot of experience with this individual, worked very well as a team, that he's very qualified, that he was hired there to do what we're looking for here, and that the elders were already seeking some of the information that we look at before we recommend a candidate to the elders. So I think that review is either in process or has taken place, and truthfully, it's not my place to know everything that goes on in elders meetings, but I know that with that fit, that was my understanding of where we would go. So what I'd like to say is, even though maybe there's 25 other candidates, those on the search team know we had Slim Pickens, and we were thrilled, God dropped something. Close your ears, Trevor. God dropped something into our lap that we just couldn't believe when we interviewed Trevor. And so therefore I am I will go with, I trust some of his background, his thoughts, his inspiration, just some of the experience with some of the sermons and things he has said. So with that, just to say, when we find a candidate, everybody else went by the wayside, and that candidate went to the elders. So if we think of it that way, there was a candidate presented, we may not have done the review like we normally did, but the review was taking place already at the elder level. And we have to trust, I think, our eldership sometimes to what their decisions are. And then if they look and they find, and then they're bringing him in just like we normally would, and if that doesn't work, then maybe they'll put together a new search team. I don't know how that would work. I may or may not ever be involved in one again, but I don't know. My remembrance of that might be different, but I think we need to go, it's sort of technically, if you think about it, going through the process of what we went through as a team.
I can tell you that there may be an idea out there that we've already decided who's coming in. I can tell you that we've talked about it and we agree that he would be a good fit, but there has not been any, at least that I can remember, a vote for the elders that this is going to happen at a certain time. We're still working through the process of where God's leading us with that. So this isn't something, the position is certainly there. And if at the end of what we're talking about, or we'll be talking about this evening, God presents it and blesses the efforts that we're going there, this is just only going to move things up faster than what we had anticipated before. And we will certainly take into account the ideas that are being brought up here. The one thing to mention is in the past, we had no idea of anybody to call here. And a search team was certainly very appropriate because you don't know. When you have a known entity that has been successful in a position, sometimes you don't necessarily need to go through the process, but there still needs to be some sort of communication in how people understand who that person is when they go into doing that. And we'll have to talk about that, I think, a little bit more as an eldership to make sure we can do things well and excellently for Christ in that effort.
Before we leave this, what is Joe's full name?
Joe Hoagland. Yeah, Joe Hoagland, Hoagland. I knew Joe when he was
Middle name? Just
Joe.
so we know it's the right one.
JoJo.
Sure. That I couldn't tell you. But I first met Joe when he was, I think, in 4th grade, maybe a little bit younger. I was his camp counselor at camp when I first started off in ministry. He was an intern when I was down in Lancaster. They came up to us and said, hey, we got this local kid, needs someone to train him in ministry, and we want to give him the unfortunate privilege of working with you. So I did. And Joe went through probably one of the hardest times I've had in ministry was when Joe was there working with me. So he's seen the ugly side of church ministry at its absolute finest. His first day on staff with me was probably the worst day that church had had in a decade. And we went through and worked it all through. But anyway, stay with me there. When I wrote my recommendation to his professors, passing him on his internship, essentially my note was, I wish there was a way we could hire him here because we could use his personality here and for us. But we couldn't because it just wasn't happening. It wasn't a position that was open. When we were hiring in Marion and looking for that position, we had a few candidates that we were looking at, and Joe was one of the candidates that we were looking at. And essentially, there was just a personality fit. I'm very big on when it comes to a hire, and I've been blessed so far to have had some successful hires of other pastors on staffs I've been on. And essentially, I believe I've only had to let go of one out of the hires I've made, and that was for a personal reason. But at any rate, what I have observed is you should hire a candidate off of several aspects. One of them being coachability. Is this person coachable? Can they learn? What's their attitude like? You know, do you want to bring someone in who has a stern, tough, hard to deal with attitude, or how will that work with the overall team? Those things are important. What's the chemistry like with the existing team, either the staff or the other people and personnel they'll be working with? So the teams who are already in place, the church overall, the pastor, et cetera. Are we bringing somebody in here who could be a problem personality and chemistry-wise? Their competency, can they do the job, is important as well. Their character, who are they as a human being? Joe is a Steelers fan, so that he lost a little bit of points, but it's all good. But then ultimately, I think, and to speak to much of what Brian said, the calling aspect. So those are the 5 C's that I've always chosen to hire somebody off of. He met those 5 for us in Marion. I believe in this circumstance, he meets those 5. The way this has shaped up, you truly, after all the X's and O's are complete, you truly have to go back and you have to say, what is God doing with this on the timing end of it? What's happening in our congregation? What's happening in his life? How does all that go up? But his name is Joe Hoagland. He and his wife, Jenna, have 1 daughter. They are going to be having a baby in early March, late February. So that's another dynamic to look at. So that'd be baby number 2. He is, I believe, 27 years old. I know it, 27 years old. Many times I've said he's probably the most responsible 27-year-old I've ever met. Probably more so than myself in a lot of ways, but we won't say that out loud. But that's Joe in a nutshell there. He also has a ministry on the side called, he's written a book called Sticky Preachers, and Preaching Sticky Sermons, there you go. And then Rookie Preacher is the name of their organization. He and another friend from Bible college have that, and they basically train bivocational pastors to preach. So that he also has that going on there. But one of the things that I've always liked about Joe is he's definitely not as outgoing as I am. He's more on the introverted spectrum than I would be. But the man can truly relate to anybody, and his attitude is great. And as we're in a church setting where we do have a lot of older generation and we're trying to reach a younger crowd, his personality would really do well to bridge and communicate and respect every generation he's working with, and to have that ability. So the personality of the human being, in addition to what I've met in you, is why I think that would be a good relationship. Yes, ma'am.
Having been on a number of search teams myself, and you have, too, that what's written on the paper and what they interview like isn't always what you get. So, I'm understanding and I'm thinking, and sometimes we think we'd have the best candidate, and of course they were gone. And that was always disappointing, and then I had to say to myself, well, God didn't want that person here. But I just know in recent years, we've had that situation that what we thought was, going to happen didn't happen because it was written down and it was said, but that's not what it was.
And since this has come up, I need to say too, he's had one other opportunity to go preach somewhere as a lead pastor, and he turned that down. He didn't feel it was a good fit for he and his family. He currently had another church that was interviewing with him, and he asked me, he said, Trevor, what do you feel I should do? Because I had told him, just please keep me apprised to what maybe you're interviewing with or doing, because I need to know how much time to invest in this. And I had actually encouraged him, and still did, if in the meantime, while you're waiting on us here, if something else comes up and you feel you got called, take that. Like, I've been very open with him on that, and he knows that, because we got along well in Marion, but the time came when I felt the calling up here, and you got to do what's best for your life and family and calling. I've told Joe, you have to be a steward of your calling, and if you're in a situation where you can't use your gifts to the most effective way, then you have to be a steward of that, and that's why I left Marion to come here. And that's the situation he's in now. But we've had that conversation as well. I believe the next step would be the fiscal part. So do we want to bring Frank on up here?
Well, let me talk.
Or do you want to
about that
continue?
just a minute.
Okay.
The other thing I want to just mention here,
sit down
and
right here.
if there's other questions, I know how sometimes in a crowded room, sometimes we don't always want to speak up or voice our thoughts in front of a crowd. I just encourage you to please talk to an elder, talk to Trevor. We want to make sure that your concerns are addressed or talked through at least. So feel free to catch up with any of us. The other part of what we're looking to do, obviously, is the fiscal side of things. Now, this should be a chart that you're rather familiar with. And just want to set out why we want to also make part of this next campaign something to do there. If you look at this chart, how many of you know what you're looking at? Wow, that's good. For those that don't, I'll try to explain it. If not, I have several experts here that could talk me out of the trouble I'll get in. First line, you have the budget that we need each week. Now, I'll say this. When we set a budget, it's what each team thinks that they might want to use for over the year. And to my knowledge, it's probably been, if at all, since I've been here, have we ever hit a budget in giving-wise? I think that's a nice thing to shoot for. So what the numbers that we're looking for is what is our giving compared to what is our spending. Now, does anybody see a problem here? Anybody at all? We have an issue. These numbers here are indicating that we are not giving to what we're spending. Now, I want to make something clear. We are not in debt. Does everybody know what debt is? Debt is when you owe somebody else something. We don't owe anybody anything. What we have been doing is dipping into some of the reserve we've had in order to pay some of this, but we don't owe anybody anything. So I want to make sure we're clear on that. So then what is this campaign for? This campaign is for us to help bridge this gap between this number and this number. We're looking at, I don't know, whatever that is, probably about, at this point, $11,000. Am I reading that right? $11,000 difference. Now, this isn't new to this year. This has been happening for the last...
That includes the Christmas offering.
Oh, and that includes the Christmas offering. So if you take that out of there, which would be appropriate, you're actually looking at about 30-some thousand
That's correct.
that we're behind. We've been behind on giving to spending for many years. What would you say, Frank and Chris? Probably last...
For example, if we take out the same Christmas offering, we only, we had giving was about $215, so it's down, it was down too.
Right,
But the Christmas offering there got it up to a higher number.
right.
So if you compare the 227 to the 216, so giving is down from 2018 to 19 by $11,000, which happens to be the same number.
So we're behind, and we've been behind giving to spending for the last 5, 10,
At least 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years. So here's the issue. I mean, in the past, we have used our Christmas offering to catch up. The idea is to stop that trend. We need to meet our giving to spending in order so that we can honor God with the things that we're doing. To keep using money to catch up is not being responsible with what we have. So we need to change that trend. It would make our finance team feel more comfortable. Chris would feel better as she's doing the books, and Frank would be a lot happier if we could do that. So what we need to try to do is bridge this gap between this number and this number. Now, if you'll notice, missions is in on that, as well as our operating fund. Now, missions has been doing fairly well, but they've had also some money that they've been operating off of, and let's face it, circumstances over the last few years has brought us to a place where not only has our numbers dwindled, but giving's been dropping. Unfortunately, we have bills that have to be paid that still have to go out that we can't really do anything with in order to do that. So what we're trying to do in this campaign is help us bridge that gap. So one, we won't have that gap. And two, if we're successful, we can also build our reserve back up. It isn't going to go back to where it was, but hopefully we can use some of that in order to put back in so when God has plans for us ministry-wise, we will have money on hand to do the things that we need to do. Does everybody understand what we're trying to do with that? Does anybody have any questions? Yes. I knew if I waited long enough.
My question is the Christmas money, excuse me, are they taking that to start to hire a minister, not youth minister?
Family life.
No, if that's to help make up the budget, where are we gonna get the money to pay the minister?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Before I move on to that, because we're going to get into that, is there any other questions on what we're trying to do here? I mean, I think it's fairly clear, and what we want to do is change our future with that. So here's where we're going. We'd like to raise $120,000 for the addition of a family life pastor, and we're talking about the other half of his salary this year. And we're also talking about making and bridging this gap that we have for our financial stuff. Now that sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But what we want to try to do, and why we believe that God is calling us to do these things, is because if we want our future to be successful, if we want our future here as a church to move according to God's will, and that is to save all men, then we have to have a place in order to be successful to do that. Trevor mentioned earlier, if we don't do anything, and all we do is keep trying to, at the end of the year, make up for the loss that we had, we'll never gain into the place where God can use us to be successful in ministry. So there's several ways that this is going to or could happen for us. What I'd like to do is get some guys, we got some cards here. I'd like to get those handed out so everybody can have one and talk through that. What we're asking people is for a one-time contribution or a 1 to 2 year commitment to fulfill this. We were doing a little bit of number crunching, and by the way, the elders have gotten together with our trustees, and I think we've had some really great conversations on how to do this and how to approach this. When you look at our giving units of this church, and that's how many units, not people, how many units, families, individuals, give on a regular basis every Sunday. Our understanding is that average is about 40 giving units a Sunday. When you do the math in there and figure it all out, this would be about $28 a week more per giving unit, and then we've made up this amount that we're looking for, which helps us with the financial end of the family life minister, brings us from a negative spending to giving to a equal or positive, with even a chance of bringing our reserve up a little bit. All right? Now, we also recognize the idea that, as we just looked, there's a lot of us, and I'm glad I can put myself in this category now, that are retired. Thank you very much. Sorry, those of you that aren't. But thank you for your contribution to Social Security. I really appreciate it. There's some that aren't going to be able to give that amount, and that's fine. What we want people to do is pray. God is the one that is going to lead our hearts into the ideals of the church here. Prayer is the number one thing that we need to happen in order for God to, one, make sure we're leading into the will that He is directing us to, and two, that when this does happen, that we can give God the credit for the things He's doing. Now, when you look at this card, and by the way, if you got any questions, feel free to ask. When you look at this card, you're going to find several things on here. You're going to find one, an explanation at the top of what's the project next. And then the next it talks about the gift and what does that mean. And then it talks about how to participate, and it gives you the idea on the cards here. Now at the bottom is a place for your name and address, you can or cannot put that on there, or you can if you want to, and if you don't have to. But the reason that we have these cards is because we want to understand how God is directing you in the things that you can do to help God's plan be successful in this church. Now, along with this, I will mention this, that we are holding off on Family Life Minister until we see half of this pledged at this time. And we'll talk about the dates and all that coming up. We have thrown a fleece down for the Christmas offering. If you remember the story of, I believe it's Joshua, threw the fleece on the ground and says, Lord, if this is what you want me to do, make this fleece wet and the rest of the ground dry. Well, the fleece was wet. Matter of fact, it was dripping with our Christmas offering. Well, this is the second part of Joshua's asking of God. Now make the ground wet and the fleece dry. This is that part where we're trying to have God show us how we can participate in the things that He is wanting us to. A couple of things that I want to note here. This again is for giving and building the whole thing up. This comes from Malachi 3:10. And he's saying here, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this. People think that in order to test God, that's not a good thing because we're mere humans and God is God. But here God is saying, test me in this and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. That's an intimidating thing, isn't it? To try to trust God enough to move forward on a plan that sometimes we wonder if we're actually going to be able to do the things that God wants us to do with that or not. We will sometimes question whether on what we know we can do and not do, will God be able to successfully prod us to reach a goal? The thing is the elders, trustees, Trevor, we've had a few months to think about this, pray about this. We've had many discussions on what is God's will and how are we going to be able to do this. And there's some things that we've come to the conclusion of that we may not be able to do this, but if we believe that God is the God that He is, He will direct our paths and make these kinds of things happen. So one, pray. Pray that God directs you. Pray that God opens your eyes and heart to what His ministry is here and what He's going to lead you to do. There's some that aren't going to be able to do that $28 a week, and we understand that. There's some that can do more. However it works, God will bless us in the ways we can go. Now, in this next one here, this is not something that financial people, especially in the church, really want to bring up because you just never know what's going to happen. But if you don't know this passage, this is where they're getting ready to build the sanctuary. And they're asking for the Israelites to bring things in. And I just want to read through this real quick. It says, Then Moses summoned Bezalel, and this other guy that starts with an O and I can't pronounce his name, and every skilled person to whom the Lord had given the ability and who was willing to come and do the work. They received from Moses all the offerings and the Israelites had brought to carry out the work of construction in the sanctuary. And the people continued to bring freewill offerings morning after morning. So all the skilled workers who were doing all the work on the sanctuary left what they were doing and said to Moses, the people are bringing more than enough for doing the work of the Lord commanded to be done. Moses then gave an order, and they sent this word throughout the camp. No man or woman is to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary. And so the people were restrained from bringing more because what they already had was more than enough to do all the work. What would you think if God blessed and prompted us to the point where we had to say, don't bring any more? We can't take any more. We have too much. We don't know what to do with all this, so don't bring any more. I just want to challenge us. And I know it can be difficult because I've had to work through this myself. It's difficult when God stretches our faith when we're not used to relying on someone other than ourselves to accomplish a goal. Let God use you. Let God show you how He can be an impact in this church, not only to strengthen our faith, even if we don't bring anybody else here or win anybody else. Imagine the strengthening of our own faith because we followed the will of God in all that we need to do. As we look to this future here, let's look to it with gladness. Let's look to it with a little bit of fear, because I think fear causes us to question a little bit. But let us look to it with the goals of God in mind so that we can accomplish all the things that He needs to do. So, several things.
Brian, may I be excused? I have to make a trip tonight.
Yes, you can.
Thank you.
So things to do. One, I mentioned it already. Pray for God's direction. Let Him stretch you. Let Him show you how He can bless you. Now, I want to say we're not giving so that we can see how much God can bless us. That is the wrong motive to give. If that's the motive you want to give, don't give anything. Give because you want to see God's work blossom here, and God will bless you for your efforts towards His kingdom. One, fill out your pledge card. We're not asking you to do that tonight, although if you choose to, you can. They have a basket up here you can drop it in, but what we're asking you is that starting January 26th, that's 2 weeks from today, we wanted to give everybody enough time to pray about it, to talk together, to let God influence you or show you or understand God's prompting. We want you to take time to do that. So take these cards and pray over them. Pray over what God is blessing you with. And then you can either give the one-time gift or a 1 or 2 year commitment. And you write those down and you just drop them in the offering plate. And we will take those and see what God is going to do with us in our future here. Okay? Are there any questions? Comments? Yes.
This may not be the perfect time to say this, but I don't know when it is going to be perfect. I have another idea that the timing is not going to fit in perfectly with this program. But another thing is very important. We all know of churches who have wonderful endowments. Our church's endowment was stolen. So we have to start all over. But a good thing to do is to remember that wills are being emphasized these days for all kinds of purposes. And I have the idea that we're all going to leave this world one of these days. And it might be a very good gift to God's kingdom in this place to be able to leave some of our earthly possessions to God's use here. And I would like to present the idea that perhaps most of us, some of us, would like to leave some or all. I know elderly folks where I live who have no children. We usually divide up our bequests, and wouldn't it be nice to leave some of these things that we can't use anymore, and we don't want to burden our children with too much money. Maybe it would be an appropriate thing to remember the Lord in our will also, with everybody else and all the charitable things we put in those wills. The Lord's kingdom's work here needs help, and it won't be this year, next year, but it's going to be sometime.
If you didn't hear that, Dory's letting us know that in our wills we can leave money to the church, which won't help here and now. And I kind of second that. I think that's a great idea. We don't need to put that on your card, or that you're planning on leaving anything in the next 2 years. I would leave that off of there, because we're praying good life and long health for everybody. But actually, that's something we don't think about, and that could also benefit the church. Yeah, absolutely, because that's something we don't often think about, nor do we necessarily want to talk about it, because it has a...
I'm not going. What Nancy says, I remember on television, there was a little boy in kindergarten, graduation, who was asked what he wants to do when he grows up. And he said, well, you know, that's a different one. He said, anyway, he said, well, I don't want to grow up. Sunday school teacher, do you want to go to heaven when you die? And the little boy says, yes, but I don't want to catch the next bus.
Any other comments?
I don't think we can top that.
No, I don't think we can. There's one more thing that we want to talk about tonight. Now that that's all done, we just want to, Trevor's going to come up and talk about a few opportunities that we have. Yes?
Just one quick question.
Yes, sir.
If you put your name down or not put your name down, you get credit for this for tax purposes, right?
Yes. Yeah, it'll go through our financial thing. Even if you put your name down, all it is for, sometimes we need a little bit of accountability, and if we put our name to something, that talks to that. But I can assure you, we're going to have a box out front that people can put their cards in. We're not, actually I said offering plate, didn't I? I think we're going to put them in a box. When you put it in there, the only people that are going to see what you have promised God are going to be our financial people, and that's Janet and Evelyn, the one over there.
That information will not be shared with
It will not be shared. So if you put it,
Looking for any credit, right?
and what they'll do is,
That's how you spell your name.
all right. Thank you. Thank you. That's Bushnell with 2 L's. Okay, hon, remember I told you I liked retirement? I think I'm going to have to go back to work, because there might be a lot of cards with my name on it now. You'll have to go back to selling pencils out in Perry. Last thing we're going to do is, unless there's any other questions, Trevor's going to come up and talk about some growth opportunities in 2020 that we're going to be doing. And he just wants to give you a heads up on some of the things that are going to be happening and coming up here. Yes?
Before we get to that, when people do start making contributions to this, they need to direct it to the next Project Next.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. If you give a lump sum and you give your $50,000, just make the check out and put on there for the Project Next. If you use your envelopes or the envelope in the pew, just make sure you mark on there for Project Next so we can make sure it's designated for that. The other thing that I want to reiterate, this is certainly over and above what we're already giving. We don't want to take one to give to the other, because that defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do. So where God's leading you now in your giving, this is over and above what that's going to be. And if you think about $28 a week, you can get an idea of what is it that I need to do or not do in order to meet that commitment, and decide between you and God if that's going to be the case. So make sure you don't take away from your current giving to supply this. Make sure this is in addition to that. And make sure when you put it on there, it is for Project Next. Wait a minute, just go ahead, Jan.
Well, now I wasn't confused, but now I'm confused. So, our regular envelopes, so this is supposed to be in a separate envelope?
No, if you want to put it all in the same envelope, just mark what amount is going to what.
If you write a check for Project Next, just maybe allocate Project Next in the memo line.
Right.
To our bookkeeper, so we can separate.
Yeah, whatever, I think on the envelopes it has where you're given this and that. Just make sure you mark what it is you want to go to that.
There's another blank on the envelope which says,
Yeah.
just put NEXT and how much you want to go to next.
Right, so there's another spot, just put next on there and what you want to go to it. Dory, I think you had your hand up.
I did, if I can remember why.
Well, we have a few. Oh, you remember? Okay, go ahead.
When you said it was $28 per week for per unit,
Yes,
how many people, you said the whole family is one unit, right?
correct.
So if you've got a couple with 2 wage earners, they're responsible for the same amount of money as one little old lady?
In theory, they should be giving more than a little old lady.
Well, that's what I thought.
Well, good. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Averages out.
Yeah, it just averages. There's, when you think of the 40 units, there's more that give more than that and those that give less. And if you think 40 units with who we have, I mean, there's some that probably don't give, but that's just an average. And all we're asking is for God to lead everybody to where you stretch yourselves a little bit. All right, I'll turn it over to Trevor. Hang on. Well,
You can just stand here, I'll just talk into it. All right.
yeah, I don't want to get that close to you.
All right. By God, about another hour to go here, and we will be good. I'm joking. 55 minutes, like tops. All right. So I just want to go through a few growth opportunities. And one of the things that we come down to is this. These are just some things that you'll be seeing rolling out. Some stuff we could get involved with and everything else. But just even a few things to keep in mind is we are really trying to target just families for Christ. And what that means is you'll hear the word family a lot.